What's going on YouTube? Going with kind of a different video today rather than just the actual video games that I play all the time. I'm here with a couple friends, Hunter and Caden. We're going to be doing a tier list for the all four power conferences in college football. It's no longer the Power 5, ripped to the Pac-12. A couple things to kind of headline before we get started is that we're going to go by conference. So we're going to start with the ACC, then go to the SEC, Big 10, then Big 12. And as you can see here, we have 7 different tiers in this tier list. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to go over all of them. But like I said, we're going to go in conference order. We'll talk about stuff like transfer portal rankings and recruiting class rankings for 2024 for each team, as well as the number of returning players they have from their last season. And we'll discuss their schedule that they have for this year, as well as our projected records. And obviously that'll kind of determine where they go in the tier list. So we'll kind of get started with Florida State. I know that's a higher ranked team than most on this list, but oh well. So, Hunter, Caden, either of you guys want to get started with this?
Yeah, I think the obvious place to start at is definitely talking about the transfer portal. I mean, obviously getting DJ to be their quarterback coming in this year, obviously from Oregon State. It's going to be a new look for Florida State. They lost a couple players to the draft last year, but they still have a really good defense, and they're definitely going to finish on the top side of the ACC. I mean, looking at their schedule, there are some trap games like we've. If you look at it, SMU after coming back from California is definitely a trap game. Flying away across the country and then come back and having to play at SMU. And then you have Clemson the week after that. I think those could be trap games depending on how good Clemson is this year. But overall, I think they'll be pretty good this year. Probably somewhere in the playoff, obviously contention they hope to be in. That Florida State's always ready to go, and especially winning at home, they don't lose at home. So I think that's the one thing they're going to have this year.
I agree. Mike Norvell, I like him. I think he's a good coach. I think a lot of this comes down to DJ. He did his thing at Oregon State. He did all right, and then transferred, and it didn't really work out at Clemson. And now he's here, so I guess I just think I don't know what to think about DJ. I haven't seen anything that I find very intriguing or I don't know the word
Floor raiser than a ceiling.
He hasn't impressed me yet.
I think a floor raiser rather than a ceiling raiser. I mean, if you look at Oregon State last year, incredible running back, incredible defense, and they really didn't. They overperformed like most people thought they would, or live up to the lofty expectations that were given him last year. So the question is, how good can DJ be? Now he went to Clemson, went to Oregon State. Now he's here at Florida State. I mean, this is going to be his last chance to prove that he's an elite caliber quarterback, like he was projected to be coming out of high school.
Well, I think DJ's a good quarterback. If you look at his stats from his last season at Clemson compared to his one season at Oregon State, they're basically the exact same. But like Hunter said, he's more of a floor raiser rather than a ceiling raiser. The thing with him is that he won't really lose you a game anymore. I think back in his early years at Clemson, he definitely would, but he's matured now. He's a solid quarterback.
Yeah, that's
The only thing I worry about with Florida State now is the loss of weapons and how they can compensate for that. You lose Johnny Wilson, you lose Keon Coleman. Those are two NFL receivers right there. Obviously, their transfer portal class is 6th in the country, but you never know how transfer players are going to turn out, how it could start with the season. Maybe they falter a little bit. The good thing with them is that Georgia Tech on a neutral field in Boston College the first 2 weeks, I don't want to say are cupcakes, but they're easier than it could be. So I think Florida State is going to go 10-2 this year and be a playoff contender. I agree with Hunter in that SMU could be a major trap game. In fact, I actually have SMU beating Florida State and their other loss being at Notre Dame. So I think they run the table besides that and may or may not play in the ACC championship game. So another top tier ACC team, or at least has been in recent years, is Clemson. Do either of you guys want to get started with them?
I think there's a very good chance. I don't know if I say very good. I think there's a decently high chance that Clemson ends the year with Dabo on a pretty hot seat.
Dabo's been on the hot seat for the last 3 years.
So he definitely has been, but I think this is the year that if they can't make a turnaround and get back to where they were back 5-6 years ago, that those fans are, gonna get tired of his goofy ass of not being able to. I mean, he has not been able to adjust with the portal, NIL. It's just not working. And so I think this is the year that I think it's a make or break year for him as Clemson's coach. If I had 2 national championships under a coach, or what, 3? You have 3 at Clemson? 2. If I had 2, I'd keep him for life. But I know Clemson fans aren't the same breed. And
I think now it's not even just that. It's that he raised the expectations. Like, Clemson prior to 2016 hadn't won a championship since the 80s. So like, their fans kind of weren't. They're not Alabama level fans. I think he turned them into that because he won 2 championships in 3 years. So when you raise the expectations because of your performance, you're expected to keep that level of elevation. Now that he's kind of turned things down, like, I agree with you. Him refusing to use the transfer portal and saying like, oh, we're gonna raise players in God's name, image, and likeness. Not only was it corny, but it was misguided and stupid.
It was bad.
It was terrible. And the thing about Clemson is that through their, I guess, I don't want to call it a dynasty, but their golden age, they had top 10 recruiting classes every year. This year, they only have the 14th recruiting class. They only have 11 players returning, but their transfer portal ranking is all the way down at 68. So you're not having a ton of player retention. Your freshman players that you're relying on are not as highly rated as before, and you're basically completely ignoring the transfer portal. So all 3 of those things, as well as losing Brent Venables and Garrett Riley kind of underperforming last year compared to what everybody expected, it's a recipe for disaster. I still have Clemson going 9-3 just because I think their defense will carry them, but Cade Klubnik, I actually like him as a player. I just feel bad for the situation he's in, and Dabo is
I agree.
So stubborn. And I think they lose to Georgia, I think they lose at Florida State, and they lose at Virginia Tech. The rest of that, their schedule isn't insanely tough. So
yeah, I was just about to say, I think they have a pretty favorable schedule. And like, now that I'm looking at it, like, they really don't, other than Georgia, Florida State, like.
We're gonna see. I think the real game to determine how good Clemson will be this year is that home game against NC State. I mean, they're gonna play Georgia week 1. That's probably obviously gonna be an opening day loss for them, and they play App State, which they should beat, but App State you can never count out. But that NC State team has a really good defense. Even though they lost Peyton last year, they're gonna be really, really good. So by that week 3 game, we'll know if they're gonna be the Clemson that we've seen over the last decade and their dominance, or if they're going to be a team that that maybe they won't beat. Maybe they won't beat Louisville. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will lose to Virginia Tech. Maybe they lose another game to at Wake Forest or home against South Carolina. Those are losable games. Nothing's given in college football, and this is definitely somebody who's hoping to be, somewhere in that playoff contention, whether a playoff contender or playoff dark horse. I mean, somewhere in that range. But the schedule could go either way. I definitely still think they'll be a good team, but somewhere they're trying to make the playoffs. So, giving Clemson benefit of the doubt, I think I personally put them in playoff contenders rather than the dark horses.
I have them at dark horse level, but Caden, sorry, what were you gonna say?
I agree. I'd put them at playoff dark horse. I think, like Hunter's saying, I agree that NC State game is going to be an important game. But I don't know about you guys. Like, when I look at someone's schedule, like, I always see a game that's like a game when the wheels start falling off, and I honestly think the game against Louisville could be that game if they aren't succeeding. I think by the time they get to Louisville, that playing Louisville, who I think Louisville is going to be pretty good this year, at Virginia Tech won't be easy. Closing the season with South Carolina
and at Pitt, who will be improved from last season.
Like, I think that could be a tough stretch that could send it all tumbling downhill.
Completely agree.
Well, speaking of Louisville, we can just jump right in there, right?
Yeah, because we have them.
Louisville's got the number one transfer portal class. So, I mean, I obviously
we need to preface. Hunter and I are diehard U of L fans, U of L alums. I mean,
so we know
we're
this
trying
team
to be completely unbiased. Yes, but keep going.
Obviously, but there are two. Obviously, I don't know if anybody's seen the college football game rankings. Quincy Riley, obviously one of the top corners of the game, finally getting the respect. I swear that man is underrated. To me, he's a little bit of Louisville bias. He's the best cornerback in the ACC. Obviously, there's some contention there with Dorian Strong and others. And then Ashton Gelati, man, beware the hair. I mean, that guy is All-American preseason for a reason. But the real difference maker this year, obviously losing both Jawar Jordan and Isaac Arendo, is going to be the running back room. And bringing in the Texas Tech transfer, Tyler Shuck. He's been hurt. When he plays, he's incredible, but he's not been able to stay healthy a single year in his college career. So that's really going to be the make or break for the Cardinals this season. I mean, the schedule that they have, they really avoid all the tough teams. I mean, they don't play Virginia Tech. They don't play Florida State. You know, the only two games they're really going to have this year that are going to be really tough, they play Miami, they play Notre Dame. SMU is going to be a good team, and then Notre Dame. And then obviously they haven't been able to win against Kentucky the last couple of years to our dismay.
At Clemson as well.
The at Clemson game. I think the ceiling for this team is really like 11-1, but the floor still is going to be a respectable, 8-4, something in that range with losses to, say, SMU, Notre Dame, at Clemson, and then maybe throw in a surprise loss in that game, or throw in the Miami game. But they have a really good team, and obviously #1 transfer portal class as well.
Yeah, Louisville is an interesting team next season because their defense should be at top of the ACC alongside Clemson, at least talent-wise, but you never know. Offensively,
Yeah.
I think that there are some holes at wide receiver. You have Colin Lacey, who is a preseason All-American, who will be really good. Basically a guaranteed 1,000-yard receiver, but Ja'Cory Brooks, the transfer from Alabama, you don't know how he'll play. Chris Bell should make a jump, another wide receiver that was pretty good last year.
Yeah,
You never
I was
know.
gonna say I think you all have two very good receivers. I think Chris Bell, I could see a breakout year for him, and Ja'Cory Brooks is very good. And I agree that there's probably a hole in terms of like your wide receiver 3, but all in all, if Tyler Shuck is who he is, I think it'll do pretty good for you guys.
Mm-hmm. Tight ends, probably the best in the ACC, but the thing is, Tyler Shuck's health is a major thing. Jeff Brom, after beating big opponents, always loses against bad teams, so there are some trap games, say, if they potentially beat Notre Dame, then they could lose to SMU, who is a solid team that isn't even necessarily a trap game, but you could beat Virginia, lose to Miami. You get the picture. Or you can beat Miami, lose to Boston College. Sorry. I have Louisville at 10-2 in the playoff contenders below Florida State, but I'll get to that later in terms of how the conference standings will go. So where do you guys have them in your tier list?
I have them playoff dark anywhere between playoff contenders and playoff dark horses. I think you guys are very good. These guys are big Louisville guys. I'm myself a Kentucky guy, so I'm trying to stay unbiased myself. But I think it'll actually be a very competitive year between the two of us, and I think you all have a good team. I think your defense looked good. That spring game that we went to, I honestly saw a lot that I would have liked to see if I was a Louisville fan. Your schedule really isn't, like, looking at it, it really doesn't look too challenging. I mean, you play tough teams, but I don't think it'll be anything that's too much of a challenge. I think the 10-2, 9-3 range is good. I think you all would be probably, if you don't win the ACC, I could see you guys, in that championship game.
I would agree. I'd say playoff dark horses for me as well. 9-3, assuming they lose the games that they're not favored in and win the games they are favored in, which obviously that's not how football goes. But at Notre Dame, home against Miami, and at Clemson. If you say you're going to win the rest of the games, which is something that you can say with confidence, no disrespect, Cade, in the UK. At 9-3, that's definitely somewhere in playoff dark horses. The question is the resume going to be good enough to vault them into that top 12 and allow them to, make the college football playoffs, whether that's at the 12 or at the 9 or whatever. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that works, but I'd say playoff dark horses for sure.
And I think it, again, I'm trying not to be biased with this, but I think it does come down to that Kentucky game because it's allegedly the last time we're going to play each other. Mm-hmm. It's last game of the year. It could be one of those games where you're right on the brink, and if you all win, you're sitting good for that playoff spot, or if it goes the other way, could put you right on the other side of that, but I think it all depends on. I don't want to say it all depends on that game, but I think there's a lot of weight in that game with how much is behind that. With it being the last game, it's in Lexington. It's going to be a pretty hyped up game, and I think that'll be fairly important for you guys going into the.
It'll sum up
postseason.
the season. It'll sum up the season.
Yeah,
That's
I
how
agree.
it's
That's
been
a
the
good
last
way to
couple of
put it.
years. Has summed up the season. Last year losing to them, when it felt like we should have won easily, especially losing to you all had a kick return touchdown last year, and that was really what did it in. Lost by 7 points, fumbled the ball twice. Players that we didn't just never made mistakes all year, and then towards the end. But it was the epitome of our season. Was fantastic early in the year, end of the year started having those troubles. So we'll see what the schedule what the season looks like when it starts to play out. But you're right. That game will be the tell all of how the season went.
For sure. Well, next up we have a team that has a lot of hype in the ACC next season is NC State, who I actually really like. I think they have arguably the best receiver in college football as a true sophomore, Kevin Concepcion, who was a freshman. I don't know if he was an All-American, but I know he performed really well, and that was with some, at times, shoddy quarterback play. This season they have Grayson McCall, the transfer from Coastal Carolina. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's a gunslinger, really good quarterback. I think he's a great fit for NC State, who may have the best defense in the ACC. So I really like their defense and their potential on offense. Their schedule is pretty favorable. Again, I would say I have them losing to Tennessee on a neutral field and at Clemson. Besides that, though, they should run the table. I mean, after their Clemson game, the toughest opponent they would have, I would say, would be at North Carolina in the last regular season game. So I have them going 10-2, and based on the conference standings with tiebreakers and whatnot, that would mean that they would actually win the ACC. So I have them at the top of playoff contenders as of now, and I'll let you guys take over from there.
North Carolina game at the end of the year is going to be at Georgia Tech and at North Carolina. Obviously, North Carolina and losing the quarterback who went to pro last year. North Carolina and Georgia Tech are going to be two good games. I think that again, that NC State's going to play. And really, last year the offense was the problem. As incredible as Kevin Concepcion was, I mean that Virginia game, the Marshall game, and the North Carolina game. I mean, he played out of his mind and had over 100 receiving yards in all those games, 6 receptions, caught at least 2 touchdowns or at least 1 touchdown in all those games. Just what an incredible game from him. And he, with McCall coming in, I mean, McCall was incredible last year. So at Coastal Carolina, and you're right, he's a gunslinger, and he's gonna move the ball around. I think it's gonna rely more on those other wide receivers and how good their run game is. Jordan Waters is definitely somebody that is gonna have to carry the load this year. I mean, their run game last year was almost non-existent, and it really, really hurt Kevin Concepcion's. I think he could have had a more credible year than he did last year. I mean, only 800 receiving yards, but he still had over 1,100 yards from scrimmage. The defense is obviously it's NC State. NC State has good defense. That's just what they've been the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And that I agree with you. I think so. I don't think they'll go 10-2. I think that's being a little generous. I agree that Tennessee and Clemson will both be losses if we assume Clemson's going to be, like I said, for Clemson, this is going to be the game where you're going to tell them how good they are this year. So if they beat Clemson, I still think they could lose 2 games in those next 8 games left of the season. So especially the Georgia Tech and at North Carolina being a rival, you never know how rivalry games are going to go. Anything can happen. And then at Georgia Tech is just a tough place to play at. Georgia Tech's going to be improved. I don't think that they're in the playoff contenders. I think they're playoff dark horses, but I definitely said they're going to have a good year and never count out NC State, especially the defense.
I'd probably agree with that. I mean, Grayson McCall, I'm looking at his stats. I mean, last year he was about 80 yards short of a 2,000-yard passing season, but the 3 years before that were 2,700, 2,800, and a little short of 2,500, and that's a good quarterback to be that consistent. And like Hunter said, like that's NC State's good. They have good defense every year. They have a good home environment. They have a good fan base. They, like you said, their schedule is again fairly favorable until the last 2 games of the year. other than Tennessee and Clemson, so I'd have them right at. I don't know if I'd say 10-2. I'd probably say 8-4, 9-3, and probably sneaking in that playoff dark horse contender or playoff dark horse category.
Got it. All right. Well,
Also,
next. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll say one last thing about Grayson McCall. His touchdown interception last year was an anomaly year for him. He's going to be a fifth-year senior. His career 88 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. He just does not make mistakes. His freshman, sophomore, and junior years, 26-3, 27-3, 24-2. That's his touchdown interceptions those years. I mean, he was an incredible quarterback, and he's going to sling this ball around the field. It's just going to depend on those wide receivers. So, shout out Grayson McCall.
All right. Well, next up is Virginia Tech, another team with a ton of hype going into next season. Do either of you guys want to start out with that, or would you like me to go for it?
Go for it. I don't have too much to say about Virginia Tech, so I'll let you go ahead and start.
All right. Well, the thing. Go ahead, Hunter. Go ahead.
I got a lot to say about Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is going to be a really good team in the ACC, and the best friend is the fact that they only play two of the best ACC teams, and that's it. They don't play anybody else outside of Miami and Clemson in the ACC. At home against Georgia Tech, they play at home against Rutgers, home against Boston College. I mean, these are games they're going to win. I think they can only lose 2, maybe 3 games this year, and Dorian Strong is just an incredible cornerback. He's going to be a first-round draft pick, almost guaranteed. And the stuff that they've built, they have 22 returning players, that team. I don't know how much better you can get with all the experience they had. I thought they showed a lot of improvement towards the end of the year last year. This is going to be a really good team, and definitely a team to watch out for going forward in the playoffs. Playoff dark horse for sure for me.
Well, the thing with Virginia Tech, I am on the other side of that spectrum. I actually think that they're very overrated coming into next season. I don't like Brent Pry as a coach. What he does have going for him, though, is a solid transfer portal class, a solid freshman class at 23 and 31 respectively, and like Hunter mentioned, 22 returning players from last season, which is #1 overall in the country. I think that the returning players, as well as their little hot streak that they went on last year, are kind of giving that hype or bringing that hype to them. I don't think, if you look at the schedule last year for them when they had their hot streak, it was against piss poor teams. This year, their schedule is honestly borderline pathetic. The only good teams they play are at Miami and Clemson at home, and that's kind of it. I have them going 10-2 just because their schedule is utter dog shit. I think that they lose at Miami, and I think they lose to Georgia Tech. Surprisingly, I think that's going to be a trap game for them. But Clemson at home in Blacksburg is probably going to be a night game. If both teams are good, it'll be college game day. I just don't think that Clemson can take that. Virginia Tech has a lot of experience. Bashal Tutin is a top 3 running back in the ACC. Kyron Drones is a good quarterback that transferred from Baylor a couple of years ago. I don't think he can throw the ball very well, though. He's more of a read option quarterback. And, you know, like Hunter said, Dorian Strong is a first-round pick at corner. Their defense should be good. But their schedule is so beyond easy that if they don't get to 10 wins, it's a failure of the season.
Yeah, that's when they play Inner Sandman, come that game against Clemson. I would never want to play against them.
No,
not at home.
I think I could see Virginia Tech putting up a 9-3 year and have it be kind of agreeing with Will. I think it could be a very deceptive 9-3 where, you know, they have a very good schedule. They're winning games, but if you look at who they play, they really don't play anybody. I could see Rutgers being a weird trap game at home. I like Greg Schiano. I think what he's been doing at Rutgers is really good, and I could see a pretty easy 3-game stretch of Vanderbilt, Marshall, and Old Dominion kind of facing a sneaky good Rutgers team being a first little hiccup of the season, and then doing fine the rest of the year, like you guys are saying with Clemson and Miami. But yeah, that's all I really have to say. have much to say. I think it'll be a 9-3 year for him. Probably a good team. I'd put him a good team. I don't know if I'd say playoff dark horse.
Okay.
Personally.
Next up, since we've had so many good teams, we go to Wake Forest, who last year was pretty bad, and I don't expect much to change on that front. Their transfer portal ranking is only a measly 48th, and their freshman recruiting class is even worse than that at 53. They only have 53 returning players, or 13 returning players. If they had 53, then my God. But Dave Clawson, I think, is not only an extremely annoying coach, but I just don't like his teams. The extremely long mesh point plays at basically every snap kind of irks me, and it is never a recipe for success because whenever they play teams that can provide pressure on that, they just get demolished. Wake Forest's schedule also is pretty tough. I mean, they play Ole Miss at home, they play at NC State, Clemson at home, at North Carolina, at Miami. That's relatively
horrible.
speaking, yeah.
That would suck.
Relatively speaking, from the teams that we have talked about to this point, that is the hardest schedule. And when you combine that with a mediocre roster and head coach, I just don't think they're going to be any good. I have them going 6-6 and being in the average teams tier. And honestly, it could be below average, but trying to give them just a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. If you're 6-6, that's average. So, yeah, that's all I had to say about them.
Dave Clawson has been such an up and down coach. I mean, he started out his career being just not good, and then, having these average seasons, and then, 2021, 2022 with Sam Hartman. I mean, they went 11-3 and then 8-5, and the year after that, last year, 4-8. I mean, what a horrible up and down career he's had. I think he's on the hot seat this year, especially just, if he can't go. I mean, they have a tough schedule. I 100% agree. I think 6-6 is being a little generous. I don't. If they don't blow UConn out by 50, you'll know that's how they're a really, really horrible team. And they play at UConn, it's going to be an easy game. At Stanford, it'll be an easy game. So you have at least 2 guaranteed wins on here. Probably at home versus North Carolina A&T, that should be an easy game. So you should have 3 guaranteed wins on this schedule. But outside of that, nothing is given. I mean, even a Virginia team who probably won't be very good, it's still going to be a tough test for Wake Forest, and I don't like. I think they have good trench play, but they don't have anybody to me that really stands out except Claiborne at running back. Anybody who really stands out outside of him to really elevate this team to go to the next level. I mean, you need a great trenches to be a okay team, but to be a great team, you have to have great skill players, and they haven't had that since Sam Hartman left. And that's whether that's Sam Hartman or the offense worked really well for him over the year. A.T. Perry as well, having those crazy games. For me, I'm putting them in below average, and they could end up only winning 3 games this year, max.
Yeah, I could see that. I honestly think North Carolina A&T, Virginia, and maybe like Stanford, Louisiana,
UConn,
or like
UConn.
I think that's their best
Louisiana's a
chances
good
of winning.
Louisiana's a good team. They're really surprising.
That's fair.
So they're really surprising. They have up and down years, but I don't think that's a given game. I do. UConn and Stanford. Stanford's horrible, and we'll get to them later.
Yeah.
But UConn is just embarrassing to have even a football program. I mean, thank God they have a basketball program, because otherwise they'd be non-existent.
Yeah, I see Wake Forest 4-8, 5-7. I feel like that's all I really have to say. I don't see Wake Forest as anything surprising. I don't think they're going to be surprisingly bad or good. I think they're just going to be right a little bit below average. Just kind of
there.
Yeah.
Well, next up is another really good team. Well, at least in terms of preseason hype, and that is Miami. Either of you guys want to get started on them?
I love Cam Ward. I watched Cam Ward in the Apple Cup 2 years ago against Michael Penix in his first year at Washington, and that man has an arm. I think he's a great quarterback. He can sling the hell out of the ball. I think he's smart. I think Mario Cristobal is a great coach. I think it's a great pairing for him. I think he's going to have a lot of great success at better school with a better team around them than Washington State. I know they've had a little bit of success, but I've kind of been following Cam Ward for the past couple years, and I think 10-2 for Miami is probably spot on, if not 11-1. I think there's 3 teams that could win the ACC. I think it's Louisville, Miami, and Florida State. And yeah, I really like Cam Ward. I think he's good. He's got weapons this year.
Mm-hmm.
They got Tyler Van Dyke left, correct?
He plays for Wisconsin now.
Yeah, that's right. He left. He was good, but I think getting someone who can really be a field general, and Xavier Restrepo, my bad. I don't know. I just think it'll be a good team for them. I think their schedule really doesn't look awful. I mean, they have tough games I don't even know if I'd say at Florida, but at Louisville, Florida State, at Georgia Tech late in the year. I think that's about it. Yeah, I like Miami. I'm high on Miami this year.
I agree. I'm also pretty high on Miami. I will say losing Cam Kitchens last year, it really sucks. I mean, being one of the best DBs in the country at safety, I mean, he was just incredible. I agree. Cam Ward is an incredible player. I do worry about his touch, just because in the Pac-12 in years past, I mean, we know traditionally Pac-12 has had a lackluster defense, and that's generally why they don't perform well when it comes time for bowl games or when it comes time for the college football playoffs. So I worry about, is that air raid going to transfer over to the ACC, especially with the ACC being really good this year, but having Xavier Restrepo and having a good defense at which has been Mario Cristobal's calling over the last couple of years, having such a good defense. Ruben Bain is going to be really good, as long as they don't have any plunders like Georgia Tech last year. I don't foresee them to lose too many games. I agree. Louisville and Florida State are definitely 2 games they could lose at home against Virginia Tech. We talked about Virginia Tech and how good they could be. That's a game that it could be a 50-50. It could be a 50-50 game. And the Florida game, obviously Florida is going to be why we'll talk about them later about how how their schedule is, but that's also a game they could lose. Florida's hungry this year. They need to prove they won a good year. So that first game against a rival playing in the name of what's Gainesville? Jesus,
the Swamp.
The Swamp, yeah, the Swamp. Playing in the Swamp, I couldn't think of the name of the stadium. It's definitely going to be a tough. I mean, it's just a tough place to play against, especially against a rival to open up the year. I think it's going to set the tone for the rest of the year. But even if they do lose to Florida, I don't think they'll lose to Virginia Tech at that point. I think they'll lose one of those games, but not both of them. Just because they kind of need to go like 4-1 to start the season, 5-1 to start the season before they play back-to-back tough opponents and at Louisville and then at home versus Florida State, another rival. But those 3-4 games this year are the only ones they could lose. I definitely put them in the playoff contenders, and they have a good chance to win the ACC this year, depending on how they play.
Yeah, I am kind of mixed on Miami. I love their roster. Cam Ward, Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Ruben Bain, maybe the pass rusher in the ACC next season. I think their roster is loaded with talent, but Mario Cristobal is, in my opinion, an overrated coach, and I think a lot of people are starting to see that he's kind of a dipshit, in all honesty. Shannon Dawson.
Well, that game last year was bad.
He's done that before. And Shannon Dawson, their offensive coordinator, should not be employed after that. And it's not
That's
like
fair.
And it's not like their offense was knocking people out after that the rest of the season. It's, they have a good team, but you need coaching along with that. And every year, for the longest time, all I heard that it was Miami and Texas that were going to be back. Texas is finally back, but Miami hasn't been yet. And until they are, I'm not a believer in them. I still have them going 10-2 just because the roster's so good, and they have several cupcake games. I think that they lose to Louisville on the road and then Florida State at home. But besides that, they should win. But the thing is with Miami, they get up for big games, but they're prone to losing against poor competition. And that may happen, but I think this is the best roster Miami's had in maybe 2 decades. I know in 2018 they got as high as number 2 in the country, I think, playing the ACC championship game, but they got blown out against Clemson. They weren't as good as their record said they were. And this year I think it'll be somewhat the same, but their roster is going to be able to compete, more than compete, with anybody. So I have them in playoff contenders because if you go 10-2 in the ACC this season, you kind of belong there. So I'll have them above Virginia Tech, but below Louisville in playoff contenders. And that's all I have to say about them.
Yeah, I have them on in playoff contenders as well, and I feel like I've talked too much about Cam Ward, but I think if they make it to that playoff contending spot, I think you could see Cam Ward's name, maybe not as a Heisman favorite, but in that talk.
In that conversation, for sure. And I think regardless he will be, but yeah, that's, Moving on, I guess. Next up is Cal, who nobody is really talking about. I think they'll actually be decent next season. I think that they are unlucky in that they have to play some of the top ACC teams next season in their first year in the conference. They don't really have a good freshman recruiting class, but they have 17 returning players and a pretty good transfer portal ranking at 15 for Cal, which is a hard school to get into, and usually is not any type of recruiting power. But Jaden Ott may be one of the better, or he will be one of the better running backs in the ACC next season. But the problem is with them, they had to play at Auburn, at Florida State, Miami, at Pitt, NC State at home, and at SMU. And I have all those games being lost.
That's honestly a kind of brutal schedule.
It is. I think they're going to be the type of team that is going to beat everyone they're supposed to, but lose every game that they are underdogs in. So I have them going 6-6, but I have them as, or not above average, an average team above Wake Forest. So that's pretty much all I have to say about them.
I would agree with them being above or average to somewhere in that like above average tier. You're right. Their schedule is brutal. Not only because they play a lot of tough teams, Auburn, FSU, Miami, NC State, SMU, but just because of the traveling. To be a West Coast team, and they start out at home against UC Davis, then they travel to Auburn, come back home for San Diego State, go back to Florida to play Florida State, come back home to California to play Miami, then go at Pittsburgh, then go.
Dude, that's horrible.
I mean, Caden said it earlier before we started, and you said they have to travel all the way across the globe, the globe.
I'm pretty sure the mileage from like traveling to and from all of their away games is roughly the circumference of the Earth.
Yeah.
That's just insane.
That is
insane.
Times, yeah.
This will be the game that tells all of college football. This will be the team that tells all of college football, does conference realignment matter? Does it make sense? Because, this is a California team that could be, are they going to be really good? No. But are they going to be average and to above average? Yeah. But if they lose and they go less than 6-6, or they even go less than 5-7, if they're only winning 3 or 4 games, this is really going to tell all of college football that, conference realignment has to make sense, and traveling from West Coast to West Coast makes more sense than traveling from west to east to west to east to west to east to west to east, and then randomly, have to play at Texas for some reason. These players are going to be tired, but I agree with you. They have a good team. Are they going to perform like they have a good team? Probably not, just because they have a really tough schedule. So I'd put them in that 5-7, 6-6 range. Definitely average, even if their schedule, just kind of like Florida, even if their schedule and their record doesn't show it, this is definitely going to be a good team, or an average to above average team.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean that travel, along with honestly the strength of schedule, is going to absolutely crush this team.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cal had chances to be probably maybe a little bit above average, and then I saw their schedule and realized that they go, like you said, Hunter, from California to the East Coast, 3 times? And then you're not even counting
3 trips back and forth.
You're not even counting Auburn and SMU, who are both halfway or a little more across the country. This team is going to be exhausted by the end of the year. by the second half of the year, honestly. And I just don't know if you can really fight that as a college team. You know, NFL players do it a lot, but I mean, they're built for that. These are college kids who have class, they have school. Like, I seeing it crushing this team. I see him struggling. I see him 5-7.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
All right. Well, next up is another new member of the ACC in Stanford, who I don't. Either of you guys want to get onto them? I imagine we probably won't have too much to say.
I mean, there's two words to describe Stanford: dog shit. They are fucking
Yeah.
awful. They are
Losing
gonna
EJ
win.
Smith sucks too. I mean, he was like their only hope, and
That's
some
it.
good talent.
They're gonna beat Cal Poly, knock on wood, and they're gonna win at San Jose State, knock on wood, and then that might be it. Like that literally might be it. So I don't know, man. This is gonna be a team that's got a tough schedule already. You know, but their only wins may be Wake Forest, San Jose, and Cal Poly. I mean, this team is bottom of the barrel for me. I mean, they're bottom feeders. They're not going to win any games. You haven't been good. Since you lost Christian McCaffrey, basically, and since he's been gone. I mean, and you're playing on the East Coast now, and you're playing a bunch of good teams. So, Stanford's not good anyway. They're horrible. So sorry, I love
Yeah,
to Stanford, basically an Ivy League school, even though they're not. But fuck, they're gonna lose. They're gonna lose.
I agree. Yeah, they just don't have the team to beat really anybody on this schedule, and I haven't seen or heard of anything I like from the coach. Will was talking about earlier about how. What'd you say, Will? He left.
So his name is Troy Taylor. He left Sacramento State to come to Stanford, and Stanford played Sacramento State last year and lost. So, if that tells you anything,
I mean, that's pitiful. Come on, man.
yeah, that's
Do better.
absolutely hilarious. Troy Taylor, I think, is a bad coach, a bad hire for Stanford, which honestly, for how high of a barrier of an entry it is academically, has been pretty good historically in basketball and football, especially football. But yeah, they're gonna suck. Their only redeeming quality is Alec Eilmanor, who I think is an NFL receiver. He absolutely dumpstered Travis Hunter in Colorado last year, and he's nearly unguardable one-on-one. But besides him, they suck. Their coaching sucks. Their schedule is ridiculously tough. I have them beating Cal Poly, and then San Jose State the last game of the season, and there was one more win that I had for
Wake
them.
Forest.
Yeah, Wake Forest. So they go 3-9, but they are legitimate bottom feeders in the ACC, and I think we just
It's gonna snowball. That's the worst part. It's gonna
Yes.
snowball.
Yeah.
You know, once you
they're
lose to TCU, lose to Syracuse, lose to Clemson, it's a snowball effect from there. You're not gonna be able to win the games even if you think you have a chance in them. So that they might not even win against Wake Forest just because you've lost so many games and the team's disheartened. You know.
I'd say bottom feeders as well. Like, they had EJ Smith for 4 years, and like at least you had something to look at and be like, oh yeah, that's Emmitt Smith's son. Cool, he might be good. He was average, and then now
At
he's
best.
gone. So, yeah, like Will said, Ale Manor's good, but there's really not much else to look at. So,
All right, well, next up is SMU, who is another new member of the ACC, this time coming from the group of 5 in the AAC. And, yeah, you guys want to get started on them?
I love SMU. SMU's it's just a good football school in history. When you go back to like the 80s and everything, obviously since then they haven't been good. But since 2019, they've been respectable. I mean, 10-3, 7-3, 8-4, 7-6, and then last year 11-3, and really last year in the American, I mean, they were the team to beat. Watching them play against Memphis was just a fantastic game. It was just a fantastic game to watch, and I really like them. I think they're going to be a really good team this year. I think they're still going to rely heavily on their running game. I think Knighton's is going to have a really good year for them to kind of have similar success to that last year, and it really helps that you're playing an up and down schedule. You do play Florida State and Louisville, but outside of that, all the other games are winnable. I think you definitely have a chance to lose to TCU. TCU's still going to be pretty decent, but 9-3 is I think is a good record for them, and I think that they could prove that they belong in the ACC not only
Yeah.
now but for the future. I mean, Rhett Leshy, I think is the coach's name. Over the last 2 years, I really like what he's done. He hasn't been able to win the bowl games, which is a little disappointing. But he's only been there for 2 years, so you kind of give him a pass in that way. So I really like the team, though. I think they're going to rely on their run game. I think their defense is going to be improved. Obviously, their linebacker core of Kobe Wilson and Ahmad Walker. But I really like SMU this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think they were one of those teams that it was a notable team that wasn't in the Power Five that always kind of felt like they deserved that spot, and I think now they got it. Their team looks good. The only thing I found was that they lost 2 starters on the O-line. I think that could be a struggle, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's 2 players, and the transfer portal is 4. So I think they could make that up. If not, I agree. I think they'll be a good team. I don't know if they'd be in that like playoff dark horse category yet. I like what they came from. I mean, SMU, they just anytime I think of SMU, I think of like that quiet team that's just a quiet killer. They're not in a G5. They're not like a powerhouse, but they're that team that like late in the year I wouldn't want to play them. And I think now that they're
agree.
in a Power 4, I guess, I think this, like you said, I think it'll be their chance to prove their standing there.
Mm-hmm. Playoff dark horses or good, somewhere in that range. I
Yeah.
mean, definitely, they're definitely going to be at worst a good team.
Yeah.
Yeah, SMU is going to be really interesting next season. I think that the only thing that will hold them back really is that their freshman recruiting class is not up to snuff in terms of ACC standards. The transfer portal class is decent at 42, but they do have 16 returning players off of last year's team. They have a relatively favorable schedule for their first year in the Power 4 now, actually. They do have some tough non-conference opponents, though, in BYU and TCU. I think those should be interesting games, but I do have them losing to Florida State at home, at Louisville, and then Pittsburgh at home. Besides that, though, I think that they play a couple of below average to bottom feeding teams in the ACC, so they can stack some wins. And I think they end up going 9-3. I'm going to put them in the good team category just because I think that they'll be obviously in the top half of the ACC, but they're not going to beat any really good teams in the conference. And all the good teams that they play in the ACC, I have them losing to. So I think they'll be a very solid team. Could end up somewhere in like the Citrus Bowl or something like that as a 9-win team, but nothing too crazy. But you guys have any final thoughts on SMU, or are you ready to go?
I think that's it.
Okay.
That's all I have to say.
Well, next up is a really interesting team in Duke, who hired Manny Diaz from Penn State, who was their previous defensive coordinator. Obviously was the coach at Miami, flamed out after being pretty good at first. And Mike Elko left Duke for Texas A&M. That should be an interesting team to watch next season as well. But in terms of Duke, Manny Diaz, I like him as a defensive coach, not necessarily a head coach. And their transfer portal ranking is only, 64th. The freshman class is only 59th, and they only have 9 returning players. Those are all indicative, outside of the transfer portal ranking, of having a new head coach. I do think Manny Diaz is a pretty good recruiter as well, but all that's going to take a bit of time to come into play. And for that reason, I have Duke being a below-average team at 4-8 this season. I don't think they'll be very good, but I think Manny Diaz is actually a pretty solid fit for Duke and what their identity is going to be moving forward. I just don't think that's going to translate to his first season there.
Yeah, I'd hate to be a Duke football fan, honestly, right now. They finished 7-5 last year. They lost Mike Elko, who I think was a great coach. They lost Riley Leonard, who I think was a good quarterback. They finished the season, honestly, I'd say pretty
poorly,
high given the circumstances. Given the circumstances of losing Riley Leonard, like, I don't know. I think they had a lot in front of them. With Riley Leonard got hurt, hopefully he comes back. Mike Elko stays. I think they'd be in a good spot, and now they're really not. And I agree that I think they're going to be a below average team. They just don't. We'll see what Manny Diaz does.
Yeah.
I mean,
And one thing that you actually mentioned that I should touch on too, a big what if is that if Riley Leonard didn't get hurt or re-injure his ankle in the third quarter of that Florida State game, because I don't know if you guys remember, but I think they were up 21-17.
they were
They
going
were
to beat Florida State.
They were handling Florida State on the road, and they were in the red zone when Riley Leonard re-injured his ankle, and they ended up losing the game handily. But if they would have gone up by 11 points right there and still had him in, who knows where they would have ended up, because they were still top 25 at the time. If you beat Florida State and maintain that momentum, you don't know where you would have been. But like you said,
you probably wouldn't have lost Mike Elko. Riley Leonard
maybe
probably would have come back.
Yeah, I mean, if you had all that hype still, who knows what could have happened? But that was the butterfly effect.
They were right
in
there.
Action. But
I think they had everything in front of them. They had like halftime of that game. They had so much momentum that they could have had, and then the shit hit the fan so hard, and now they're just right back to Duke football.
Square
Who
one.
thinks about Duke football?
Yep. Hunter.
Mike Elko wouldn't have stayed even if they would have won that football game, just because I think the Texas A&M job is with the NIL landscape is just wild west. I mean, you have oil money, you've been good in the past, you're in the SEC, etc. It's the next stepping stone. But you're right, Manny Diaz is a good coach. I'm interested to see what they do this year. I don't think they're going to be very good, just because obviously it's his first year with the new team. So I agree with the 4-8 record. I think they're going to be somewhere in that below average category. But they have a chance to surprise some people. Maybe get some surprise wins. At Northwestern could be a surprise win. Against UNC maybe, but I mean the other out of conference games don't help when you have a new team. You're trying to gel maybe it does when you're trying to gel everything, but when you're playing against bad teams, you kind of get lulled into feeling like, oh, we can win every game like this. Then you go out and play, versus North Carolina, and you get your butt kicked. So, at minimum, they're going to have 3 wins, but I don't see much more than 6 wins this year. So somewhere in that below average range.
Got it. All right. Let's see. Next up, we have North Carolina, who should be a pretty interesting team. Next season, they lose Drake May, who was drafted by the New England Patriots. They lose Tez Walker, a good receiver who had some eligibility issues last year that were not his fault, but their transfer portal class is only 32nd. They have a pretty decent freshman class at 27, but only 12 returning players. Mac Brown, I think he's turning senile a little bit. He may want to pass it off. His glory days are behind him. But with that said, I still actually have North Carolina going 9-3, with their only losses being at Minnesota, at Florida State, and NC State at home in the last regular season game. Besides that, their schedule isn't way too tough. And I like them to be competing in the ACC, but not competing at the same time, if that makes sense. They'll be a good team, but they're not going to be good enough. And they will never get over the hump this season, in my opinion.
You're going to have to watch out when you play against North Carolina. You better be prepared to play against them in their ground game. Omarion Hampton last year having 1,500 yards rushing and 16 touchdowns. I mean, that's with Drake May there. Now, Drake May is a great quarterback, and it relieves the pressure, off the running back. But you're going to have to prep up for Omarion Hampton this year. He's going to be a dog. I agree with you that they're going to be, they're going to be good, but not good. I don't think they'll be 9-3. I think they will lose to James Madison, even though they are at home. James Madison's just been really good over the last couple of years, and I think James Madison wants to prove they can beat Power 4 competition. So I think they'll lose there as well, even though they are at home. And they could get lulled into another game here or there. So still 8-4, somewhere in that 7-8 win range is what I'm putting them. I'm definitely putting them as a good team. Are they a great team? No, but you're definitely going to defend them on the ground, and hopefully this will be a year where they can prove that you don't need Mitch Trubisky or you don't need Drake May, great really, really incredible quarterback play to prove that you are relevant in college football.
We're talking college football. I don't want to think about Mitch Trubisky. No, you said it. I mean, losing Drake May sucks. You had a 3rd overall pick leave. That's always going to hurt. Omarion Hampton, I've heard a lot of very good things about him. So now, I mean, he will have more pressure now that Drake May is gone. So we'll see what happens. I agree that Mac Brown is, I think he's got not much left in him, and we'll see how it does. And I think the wheels could fall off the wagon for him this year, and could be the last time we see him. But I think North Carolina will be right about an average team. I don't think they'll do anything special. I think they're another one of those teams, like you said, Hunter, that you don't sleep on them because they could surprise you. But I don't see them being anything that would impress me.
And
That makes
I'd like
sense.
to point out also, since Mac Brown's been at North Carolina, or back at North Carolina, excuse me. I mean, 6 wins was the lowest, and 9 wins was the highest. I think it's where they're going to finish again this year, right in line with what they've done last year. Nothing great, nothing horrible,
Yeah.
something in between.
Yeah, that's why I have them at average. I think they're right on that line, and they don't have anybody other than that running back
Omari and
position to
Hampton.
really, to help forward. But I mean, we'll see. I could be wrong.
Well, North Carolina, like I said, I'm going to put them in the good team category, and I don't think they played SMU. No. So I'll actually still have SMU above North Carolina, but any parting thoughts on UNC, or are you guys ready to move on?
Ready to move on.
Mac Brown, I hope you have retirement plans.
Yeah, no. Good life insurance policy, I bet.
He's got a
Oh
he
my
qualifies for
God.
Social Security. He's got Social
Jesus.
Security.
Anyways, Georgia Tech is next up, and I see them in a similar light to Cal. I actually really like their roster. I like Brent Key as a coach. I don't want to say overperformed last year. They had some absolute stinkers, but yeah, I don't know. Brent Key is a good coach. Haynes King, I really like him as a quarterback, and they have some good returning players in Jamal Haynes and 17 overall returning players. The only issue with them is their schedule, which is Murder's Row. It might be the toughest schedule in the ACC. I had them going 4-8 and losing to Florida State, North Carolina, Louisville, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Miami, NC State, and Georgia. So they play an insane schedule, and for that reason, I only have them at 4-8, and they'll be in the below average. But that's about all I have to say about them. And but yeah, so anything else or anything you guys want to get started on with Georgia Tech after?
This schedule sucks, dude. This is a brutal schedule. Starting the year with Florida State, then going at Louisville, at North Carolina, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Miami, NC State, and then at Georgia to end the year.
That's
That's awful.
That's disgusting.
That's evil. I think 4 wins is. God, they better hope, because I think they got about 2 to 3 locked.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, yeah, that might be the toughest schedule in college football next season, honestly. Just because
No.
you got so
we gotta get to Florida,
Florida.
big fella.
Florida.
Oh yeah. Okay, well then top three toughest.
It's,
But yeah,
it's
I mean,
one of the toughest for sure, but
For
Florida's
their
easily
skill
got the
level,
toughest
yeah,
schedule.
because they
The skill level, there's a skill gap. They're playing in a skill gap.
yeah,
right here.
yeah.
They did not get skill-based
when you
matchmaking.
have potentially Duke saying skill gap, yeah.
yeah, it's
They're going to be one of
Ugly.
the few teams that their record isn't indicative of how good they are.
Right.
They're gonna start the year 3-1, losing to Florida State.
Yep.
I mean, they're gonna lose to Florida State at home. I mean, that's just it is gonna be what it's gonna be. And then they're probably gonna win Georgia State at Syracuse and VMI. But from there on out, that last half of the season, I wouldn't trade my worst
awful.
enemy have that schedule. I mean,
No.
that's horrible, especially for being in somewhere in the good to average team range. So I think they're going to finish the year as below average to somewhere in that bottom feeders range, maybe only winning 3 games. But this is definitely their record is not going to be indicative of how good the team was. I think it's going to be a good team. They have some really good players on the team. You said King. King's going to be really good, and Haynes. I think that's just They have great chemistry
Yeah.
last year, and I think they're gonna be good this year. But their schedule's just incredibly hard. So I agree. 3-9, 4-8, somewhere in there.
Haynes King, what a guy to talk about.
Yeah, he's up and down for sure, but I like him
I
overall.
mean, I think he's good. I think he's got the potential. He just at Texas A&M, he just never,
Was anything?
yeah, he
Scared.
never impressed me.
No. All right. Well, next
Texas
up
A&M's had a
is.
lot of turmoil too,
Yeah, oh
so
yeah,
I mean, that's
definitely.
it's
true.
it's a little hard to say that when last he never outside of Georgia Tech last year playing all 13 games. I mean, the years before he really never got a
Yeah,
shot. I mean, only playing a max 6 games. So I think he'll improve on last year. 2,800 yards, 27 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. I think if he keeps the turnovers down this year, they could have a better year. But still, like you said, the schedule and the
yeah.
record just not gonna be indicative.
Well, next up is Pittsburgh, who could really go either way. Last year they were god awful. I'm pretty sure they went 3-9, and the only Power Five team they beat, ironically, was Louisville. um, I don't know. Pat Narduzzi, though, with him, whenever Pittsburgh is bad, he always bounces back the next season. So this will be an interesting case study to see if they will bounce back. They do have 16 returning players from last year's roster, but pretty mediocre transfer portal and freshman class rankings. The thing with them is that their schedule is not that bad. They play at North Carolina, who I see them losing to, at SMU, who they lose to, Clemson at home, and at Louisville. Those are their 4 losses. But besides that, it's a very manageable schedule. They have a couple of tough, relatively speaking, out-of-conference games. They're not cupcakes. They play at Cincinnati and then West Virginia at home, but both of those teams are pretty mediocre, I think. So I see Pittsburgh beating both of them. And yeah, it's an interesting schedule to where it's not cupcake filled. I mean, they play pretty much all Power 5 teams outside of Kent State and Youngstown State, Power 4, excuse me. But the level of competition is not even half as bad as what Georgia Tech has. So I see them as being the opposite at 8-4 and being a good team.
And as much as we talked about Cal going around the world for their schedule, Pittsburgh is doing the complete opposite. They play home games against teams that are far away. They play home against Kent State, home against Youngstown State, home against Cal, home against Syracuse, Clemson, and Virginia. And then their away games: Louisville, Boston College. SMU is going to be the farthest they travel this year. So I think they're gonna really benefit from having an easier schedule and just not having to play away too far away from their home. I think their fans can travel with them when they do go to places. Playing at Cincy, it's not too far. So I think they're going to be a good team. And Pat, I agree with you, Will. Pat Narduzzi really one of those guys. Just in the past, what he's done for his career, has a bad year and he bounces back. It's going to be one of those years for them, especially with the schedule they have. I agree with 8-4. While I don't think that they're going to be an incredible team and be in that playoff dark horse range, I think they're still going to be good. I also think I think that good is a little. I
Bit of a
think that
stretch.
yeah, a little bit of stretch because you play, like you said, they play Power 4 teams, but they're the lower tier Power 4 teams. They're the Power 4 teams that are going to finish, 10 through 17 in the conference. They're not going to finish, top 10. So I think playing those teams will make their record look better than it actually is.
Yeah, I think they'll be an average team. I think Pat Narduzzi is a interesting character. I think he did good back when they had Kenny Pickett, and then I don't know if you guys remember this when their old offensive coordinator Mark Whipple left, and he was like, "Yeah, he sucked ass," essentially. That just left a weird taste in my mouth about I was like, "Who is this guy?" And I looked into it, and the man can't keep an offensive coordinator on his staff to save his life, and I don't know why.
He's a very prickly guy. He's not.
Yeah,
He's kind of a dick, honestly.
yeah, and I mean I think he's a good coach. I think he can get the job done. I don't know if he's a great coach, but yeah, I think average is right where I'd keep him.
I'm good with putting them at average. Like I said, I only said good because I think their record will say they're good, but I agree with the
Exactly.
average as a team.
Well, speaking of average, next up is Syracuse, who historically has been a decent program. Actually, probably good. Up until the last 30 or so years, they've been pretty pathetic, if we're being honest. But now they have new blood, in town. They got rid of Dino Babers, who was coaching there for what feels like 15 years, and he was very middle of the road. They had one good season, and here they are now. They got Kyle McCord as a transfer. They do have the number 9 overall transfer portal class, 38th in terms of freshman class, which is pretty good for a new head coach. And they do have 14 players remaining from last year's roster. Fran Brown is known as a pretty good recruiter, and that's pretty much shown with these numbers. The only question now is whether or not he can translate that to the on-field product. Syracuse's schedule is not that tough, I don't think, really at all. I do have them going 6-6 though, with losses to Georgia Tech at home, at NC State, at Pitt, Virginia Tech at home, at Cal, and Miami at home. So sort of a similar thing as Cal, to where they're going to beat everybody they're supposed to, but lose every game they're an underdog in. But they should be an interesting team to watch next season with Kyle McCord and Fran Brown as its new head coach.
100% agree. Fran Brown is that press conference alone, it got me hyped. I mean, I'm not even a Syracuse guy. Syracuse basketball is the only thing I ever knew about Syracuse before watching Syracuse the last couple of years in football. And man, he's great for the program. I think he's going to be a really good coach. I think this year is going to be a really tough year for him, though. He did get a good transfer portal class, and I hope Kyle, excuse me, thank you. Kyle McCord. I think Kyle McCord is going to prove, that Ohio State just wasn't the place for him, and Syracuse is.
You're not a 4-star quarterback recruit for no reason.
Yeah, but this schedule is deceivingly tough, because you have to think they have 5 of 6 games are road games at UNLV, at NC State, at Pittsburgh. The only game they have at home is versus Virginia Tech, who's going to be really good this year. And then you play at Boston College and at California. That's a really tough part of the schedule. Depending on how they play there, I mean, their overall season will be determined. So while they could sit somewhere in the 6-6 rings, like you said, Will, I think that they'll be a little lower than that. I think they'll probably be in the 5-7 range, but I would hope that they are in the 7-5 range for me. So I think they're going to be an average team for sure. And Fran Brown going forward in the future, I think this might be his worst year. And if your worst year is a painfully average year, you're going to be a great head coach one day. So I have high hopes for Syracuse. Just this year is not going to be the year, even though you did have a pretty good class coming in. Tough schedule, and 5-6 away, and the only one you have that's not is at home against Virginia Tech, a good team. So
yeah. I don't really have much else other to say than we'll see if Kyle McCord, is more comfortable here than he was at Ohio State. But other than that, yeah, I'd say right around that average range. I could see it maybe sliding away from him and dropping down to below average, but we'll see.
All right, well, next up is Virginia. Let's just be honest, there's really not much to say at all about them.
My God.
Tony
We
Elliott.
talked about Georgia Tech having a tough schedule.
Yeah, Virginia's
Imagine having
bad.
a less bad schedule and still maybe get one win.
Yeah.
The schedule is not bad at all, and they're still... It's not good.
I have them going 1-11 with losing to everybody except for Richmond. So
That's sad.
yeah, it's pretty
Oh.
pathetic. Tony Elliott is a bad coach. You would have thought it would have been a good hire on the surface from Clemson as their offensive coordinator, but yeah, he's not good. Their team is not good. Their talent is below average, and their schedule, they play teams that are all above them. So unless they punch above their weight, they're going to suck, which that's not going to happen. They're going to be the ultimate bottom feeders of college football. So 1-11, that's all I have to say.
That's
I
all I would
100%
say.
agree. I don't know how Tony Elliott's not going to have a job by the middle of the year. 3-7, 3-9. You don't deserve to be a football. You don't deserve to be a football coach when you haven't had any improvement. And they had a decent transfer portal and bringing some guys back, but outside of Malachi Fields, I don't see any talent on this team. And I agree with you. 1-11 is being generous, to be honest. Hopefully they win at home versus Richmond.
Yep, well, next up is actually a very interesting team for me, even though I don't think they're going to be good, is Boston College, because now they've hired Bill O'Brien back to college football. Yeah, B.O.B.'s in college football after Jeff Hafley left to go be an offensive coordinator for the Packers, which I don't blame him for, because he was already in the hot seat at Boston College. Now you bring in Bill O'Brien, who's supposedly an offensive savant. I think the game has passed him up, though. But here he is trying to revive his career. 44th ranked transfer portal class, not very good. Only 85th in terms of freshman class, which is terrible for the Power 4 at least. They have 16 returning players, though, which is good. Their schedule, though, it's backloaded, I would say, outside of Florida State. I have them losing, going 4-8, and the only wins they have would be against Duquesne, Western Kentucky, at Virginia, and then Syracuse. Besides that, they're going to lose, and they're going to be a below-average team. But should be interesting to watch only because of Bill O'Brien.
This is one of the more interesting teams for me in college football. I 100% agree. B.O.B., I mean, who knows how good he's going to be in college football. And he is an offensive genius, and I 100% believe that in my heart. And I think that it's just going to take a couple years for him to get the system that he wants instilled in college. I mean, these are college kids. There's a lot to take in, and they do have a tough schedule. So I don't even know if they'll win 4 games this year, because I think Western Kentucky is going to be pretty decent this year. I see 3, maybe 3 to 4 wins somewhere in there. It's just a tough schedule, and they don't have a lot of guys who, even though they have a lot of returning players, they didn't have much talent on that team last year to propel them above the 7-6 record with Halfley. I don't think they're gonna even make that this year.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say. Bill O'Brien will be interesting to watch. It'll be fun to see him, back in action. Yeah, it's Boston College to me. I know that's kind of, I guess, mean, but when I think Boston College, I don't. Yeah,
It's
nothing comes
painfully
to
average.
mind.
Since
They're
Matty Ice
painfully
and Luke
average.
Kuechly, they've been awful.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the. You have a final thought, Hunter?
Well, they've been average ever since they've been in the ACC since 2005. They were really bad, then they were okay, but 7 wins,
They were
7
good in
wins,
that
7 wins, 7 wins. I mean, they've had 7 wins about 10 times since they've been in the ACC, and that's the average ACC at best. And this is not going to be a year they're going to be average, fortunately.
Nope. Well, that's pretty much for the ACC. The next team we have is a partner with the ACC, but is still an independent, and that is Notre Dame, who should be a very interesting team to watch next season.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that they have a pretty manageable schedule, relatively speaking. Their toughest games are at Texas A&M in Week 1, at Purdue, Louisville at home, Florida State at home, and then at USC. The only game I have them actually losing is at USC in the final week of the regular season. I think that their team is extremely stacked. Riley Leonard is a great quarterback coming in for them. Could serve as a similar role as Sam Hartman, but maybe be even better. They do have Howard Cross, an incredible D lineman in my opinion. Mitchell Evans could be a top tight end in college football now, taking over for Brock Bowers. They have the 14th ranked transfer portal class, number 11 overall freshman recruiting class. They only have 9 returning players, though. But the returning players they do have are worthwhile, and the guys they have coming in are really good. So this is kind of a make or break here for Marcus Freeman to see if he is a legitimate coach for Notre Dame's expectations, or if he will be constantly mediocre. I do have them going 11-1, though. I think Marcus Freeman breaks through, and Notre Dame will make the college football playoff because they don't have to face a conference championship. So 11-1, they're my first playoff favorite team.
I'd agree. I think Riley Leonard will. I thought he was great at Duke. I think this is a better fit for him. I think the only thing that worries me, they have a couple trap games. I think USC is definitely one. At Purdue seems to always be a trap team for top 5 teams for some reason, top 10 teams, and then starting the year at Texas A&M at night, I think will be tough. So we'll see how they do in those games, but I agree. I think they're going to be good. I'd put them right up in that playoff contender. Playoff favorite. Yeah, I could see it. I could see if Riley Leonard lives up to the ceiling that I think he has. Yeah.
For me, Notre Dame is going to be one of those teams that's going to be, they're either going to be the very back of playoff favorites, or the very top of playoff contenders. I don't think they'll drop much more below that. I think at worst this year they'll lose 3 games. The Florida State game is 1, Louisville, and then I think that Either one of the at Texas A&M or at USC could also be a game they lose. I don't think they'll lose both of them. They might lose one of them. I agree with you. Playing at Texas A&M, it's one of the hardest places in college football to play at for a reason with Elko being there. And it's going to be on ABC at 7:30 at night. I mean, it's going to be a crazy game. It'll be a one they can definitely win and should win, but we'll see how good they improve from the offseason. Obviously, having all those guys coming in and not having a ton of guys that are returning. But I don't see them as a favorite just because I do think like Florida State's going to be better than them. I think they lost to Louisville last year. I think they could lose again to Louisville, but they are playing at home. You never know. And then, like I said, losing one of those two games. So they're going to be really good. They're definitely going to be in the top 10, but I don't see them as a top 3 to 5 team, in my opinion.
Well, you gotta think expanded playoff.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to be, like I said, they're going to be in the top 10.
I only had them as a playoff favorite because they'll be 11. They're going to be an 11-1 team. Like they're a favorite because they're a beneficiary of not having a conference championship game. So like they won't be at risk to fall.
Yeah.
So if they come in at 11-1, they're going to be top 5.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if they come in at 11-1 for sure, and if they come in at 11-1, their only loss is at home versus Florida State, then for sure. But like I said, they could lose 2 more games on that schedule, and I think that is what could put them past the 5 to that 6, 7, 8 range. I don't think they'll be much worse than that. I 100% think that they'll be in the college football playoff. I just don't think they're going to be a favorite, in my opinion.
I think they need to just grow up and join a damn conference.
I completely agree. I mean, it seems
Not
like
on
a lot more
NBC
cool.
money.
Yeah.
Not on NBC
Yeah.
money.
All right, well, that is completely done with the ACC.